If you're looking at your church insurance renewal here in 2026, I want to start off with some good news. For well run churches, this is not a panic year. In most cases, you should be seeing single digit increases, and in a few areas, things are finally starting to level off. But, and this is important, there are specific coverages where underwriters are paying very close attention. And if you miss them, your renewals could get a lot more expensive, or you may start losing out on some coverages. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what to expect in property, liability, auto, workers' compensation, umbrella, and cyber insurance. And more importantly, what you can do right now to put your church in the strongest possible position before renewal. Let's start with property because this is where many churches are accidentally creating problems for themselves. So I'm sharing my screen here. You can see my notes for what you should expect line by line for your church insurance renewals. And we mentioned property insurance. Starting at COVID, there was a huge increase in cost to rebuild buildings. And this impacted churches more than some other types of organizations because with a church, 70% of your claims are going to be related to property insurance. Somebody's going to drive into your building. There's going to be some type of wind hail event that impacts your roof. There's a fire in the sanctuary, a pipe bursts. All these things are property insurance. So when property values went up, and the cost to rebuild went up by as much as 30% or 50% in some areas, that impacted churches more than some other organizations because you had to increase the value on your building. Well, finally, here in 2026, insurance companies are starting to feel like they've gotten their arms around that issue. They've got a better idea on what it will cost to rebuild a structure. Inflation's slowing down a little bit. Cost of labor isn't increasing as much. So finally, it's leveling off. We can breathe a sigh of relief. Now, that is assuming that you have looked at your building values recently or your insurance company has adjusted your building values recently. You need to double check that. If that hasn't happened, there is a shot that you may be underinsured by 30 to 50% on your building values, which is a huge deal. It is your single biggest asset. You do not want to be caught unawares on that. Now, from a risk management perspective, here's some things underwriters are looking at that could negatively impact you. They want to see that you're doing things to insulate your pipes and prevent freezing incidents. Goes back to 3 years ago. There was a huge freezing event here on the East Coast, and there were pipe bursts up and down the coast. So one of the things companies really locked in on is they want to see that if you can implement something like water pipe sensors or make sure your pipes are well insulated, be proactive about monitoring your pipes to prevent pipe bursts. Because when that happens, it's really nasty and it's really expensive and it's really difficult to repair. Insurance companies got tired of looking at that. The other thing is they're really getting very specific about what type of repair your roof is in. They're investing in technology to look at your roof and see whether it's aged, whether it's been well maintained, what is the shape of the roof. And if it's not in good shape, they're either going to say, we're only going to cover it for actual cash value. They may not cover it all, or they may not offer coverage on your church. So if you haven't had your roof inspected recently, you need to get on that. And if your roof is starting to get a little old, so an asphalt shingle roof, for example, at 20 years old, insurance companies are starting to say, we're not going to pay to replace that anymore. We will only pay for the depreciated value. And that's here in the mid-Atlantic. Every region's a little bit different too. If you go into the center of the country where there's been more wind and hail events, coverage is even harder to get. But they are looking at your roof, they're paying attention. If you haven't inspected it recently, you need to get on that. And if it's older, you need to have a capital expenditures plan on how to replace it. Companies are paying attention. Now, moving on from that, on the property insurance side, there are a few things you need to make sure you're paying attention to on some of the other lines of coverage. On the liability insurance, abuse and molestation is the number one reason you're going to end up in court. So every year is a good year to make sure that you have youth protection policies in place. If you need samples, go to your insurance company and ask for samples on what a abuse prevention policy should look like, because there's key criteria. You need to be able to re- communicate how to identify, how to report, what your employees should do, how you're going to respond to the public. You need to have all that written down, because insurance companies more and more want to see that you have it written down. And if something happens, that is your sword and shield in court. If you end up in court without written policies and procedures, you're going in there naked. But what's even worse is if you have written policies and procedures and then you don't use them. That's terrible. So you just need to understand that the the state of the liability market is there's more abuse claims than ever before. It was already the number one way you're going to end up in court. You need to be very serious about protecting the children in your ministry. Now, on some of the other lines of coverage, auto insurance across the industry is looking to be up 8 to 15%. Now, depending on which company you're with, that may or may not happen. Some companies on the church insurance side, they focus almost exclusively on property insurance, and they very rarely adjust their auto insurance rates. But what you need to know and understand as a ministry is that it's critical that if people are going to drive for your ministry, make sure that you've run MVRs on them and they're good drivers, because the quickest way you're going to have a catastrophic accident at your church is either in a vehicle or if a youth gets hurt. And then if you put those two things together, that's a bad cocktail for a huge lawsuit. So make sure you're running MVRs on the people that drive. Workers' compensation insurance for you, as long as you've had no claims, should be flat or going down. So don't accept big increases this year on that line of coverage. For your umbrella, this is going to be another line of coverage that could be problematic. A lot of churches, they're in the 1 to 5 range. You should be okay maintaining your coverage limits at that level. You may get pushback if you want to increase those limits. Insurance companies don't want to offer more umbrella coverage right now because the number of huge lawsuits has increased across the country dramatically for a variety of reasons. And you can check out my video about the umbrella insurance market to learn more. They are not going to be excited about offering to put the umbrella on top of your sexual misconduct coverage. If you're going to try and request that, you need to make sure you've got all your documentation lined up. You've got the abuse prevention policies. You can talk about your screening before you ever go talk to an underwriter. That's critical. But if you have more than $10 million of umbrella insurance, there's a good shot that the insurance company is going to want to bring that back just a touch. Because what insurance companies are being told right now is the only way to reduce the number of large lawsuits in America is to offer less insurance. And lastly, on cyber insurance, you may or may not have a standalone cyber insurance policy. For me, the biggest things that I'm trying to educate ministries about are, one, be aware that there's more and more attacks to small to medium-sized organizations to try and fool you into wiring money someplace, to change bank account informations for your employees, or if you typically wire money to another organization, they're trying to fool you into changing those bank accounts. Make sure you have controls in place on how to identify those types of attacks and not fall for them. Well, make sure you've got multi-factor authentication, end-to-end encryption. If you have any type of sophistication, please consider working with a managed IT service that's going to help you set up your environment to make sure it's safe. And one other thing I'll throw in there that's not written down, we have a false sense of security about if we use an outside service as our database and people process all their payments through that it's in the cloud, it's somebody else is doing it, therefore we don't have to worry about it. And that's just not true. More and more, what we see is we're very dependent on a couple of key services, but those key services go down. So when I'm recording it, it's not long after Outlook went down for about 12 hours. Microsoft was brought down. CrowdStrike rolled out an update that brought down Delta and Southwest. And these entities get hacked. And when they get hacked, they don't always have enough money to pay for the damages to all the people that were compromised, let alone If you within your organization are the reason that you were hacked and that somebody got into their system, and in that situation, they're never going to take responsibility for it. So we just have to be aware of what our cyber risks are as an organization because we're probably not as safe as we think we are. All right. If you've got questions about specific lines of coverage, I've made videos about all these different lines. You can get more details about what's going on in each of those lines of coverage in marketplaces. If you want to talk to me more about your renewal, or you've got questions, you can either drop a comment here in the YouTube comments, or my contact information is in the description. It's also in the channel. If it was helpful, please hit like and subscribe. It helps other people like you find the content. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and please go build something great.